to introduce our respected faculty, Dr. Kausar Ahmed. He's an adjunct professor in University of Winnipeg and University of Manitoba, and he received his PhD in Peace and Conflict Studies from University of Manitoba in 2017. He also served in the Bangladesh Army and had extensive experience in peacekeeping operations. With his expertise in peace-building, conflict intervention, terrorism, refugee crisis, and countering violent extremism, both in Western and Eastern contexts. He's currently leading two not-for-profit organizations in Winnipeg. So one of them is been successfully engaged in CVE approaches through education. So I welcome Professor. Please, the floor is yours.
থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ তাসমিয়া, আপনাকে অনেক ধন্যবাদ এবং অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ বিইউপি কে আমাকে এই অপরচুনিটি দেওয়ার জন্য। ডাইরেক্টর এক্সটার্নাল অ্যাফেয়ার্স কর্নেল জাহির আমাদের সাথে আছেন। থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ। এটা নিঃসন্দেহে আমার জন্য একটা ইন্টারেস্টিং এনগেজমেন্ট। দিস দি ফার্স্ট টাইম আই এম স্পিকিং টু students in Bangladesh through a public university. আমাদের আজকের আমার প্ল্যানটা হচ্ছে এরকম যে আমি কয়েকটা স্লাইড অবশ্যই নিয়ে এসেছি যেটা আপনাদের সাথে আমি শেয়ার করব এবং এটার পরে আমরা মূলত অনেক সময় ব্যয় করব ইন্টারাকশনে। আপনাদের প্রশ্ন, আপনাদের কনসার্নস অ্যাবাউট টেরোরিজম, পলিটিক্যাল ভায়োলেন্স এবং স্লাইডে আমি যে তথ্যগুলো আপনাদের সামনে দেখাবো এগুলো নিয়ে। তো আপনারা এইটুকুতে একটু অনুরোধ থাকলো আপনারা যেন একটু বেশি করে এনগেজ থাকতে পারেন, কারণ দ্যাট ইজ দি ইন্টেনশন অফ সাচ ইন্টারাকশনস এন্ড এনগেজমেন্টস উইথ ইউ ফোকস। আর মূলত লেকচারটা আমি ইংরেজিতে দিতে চাই, তাতে একটু স্বাচ্ছন্দ্য বোধ করবো। আপনাদের কোনো অসুবিধা হলে আপনারা অবশ্যই বাংলাতে আপনারা প্রশ্ন আমাকে দিতে পারবেন, কোনো অসুবিধা নাই, বা আপনারা বাংলাতেও কথা বলতে পারেন কিউ&এ সেশনে, কোনো রেস্ট্রিকশন নাই। তবে যেটা বললাম, কানজাহির যেটা বলেছেন, ক্যামেরাটা অন করবেন, কারণ মোর ইন্টারাকশন বেটার, এবং আই পার্সোনালি আই ফিল এনকারেজড টু সি ইউ ওভার জুম। তো আমরা শুরু করি। আর আজকে ইন্ট্রোডাকশনের জন্য তাসমিহা তাবাসসুম সাদিয়াকে অনেক ধন্যবাদ, এবং উনি আজকে আমাদের সাথে কো হোস্ট করছেন এবং উনি খেয়াল রাখবেন ওনার স্টুডেন্টরা এন্ট্রি এবং সাবসিকুয়েন্টলি ক্লাসে যখন এন্টার করবে। তো উইদাউট ফার্দার এডু লেটস স্টার্ট আওয়ার বিজনেস, এবং আমি স্ক্রিনটা শেয়ার করি স্লাইডগুলো দেখানোর জন্য। স্ক্রিনটা দেখা যাচ্ছে? তাসমিহা একটু কনফার্ম করবেন?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. So once again in English, very good evening from Winnipeg and morning in Bangladesh. We are 11 hours apart, and it is morning, month of Holy Ramadan, and with due respect, I might sip some water from my glass, but because it is night in Canada, so please don't take it in another spirit. So as I said in the beginning in Bangla, I'm very happy to speak to you folks. You are young, you are energetic, you have new ideas. And one of the objectives from our side is that we want to engage young people on very important topics such as extremism and violence. And this is my sort of decade worth of work in Canada. I immigrated in 2010 to pursue my PhD, but right after my first year of coursework, I got involved with regards to research on terrorism and political violence, especially in my country where I live now. So the title of our today's talk is Evolving Extremism, and that leads to terrorism in the West mostly, but I would like to talk about lessons that we can generally learn from the West as well. So once again, a little disclaimer here, don't take this title, the subtitle part, lessons for the East, in a different spirit again. I'm not going to impose lessons or I'm not going to educate you folks what to do, but it's just an idea that some lessons we can learn from counterterrorism, counter-violent extremism approaches that are available in the West. Here are the scopes that you see on the screen. I'd like to talk about or let's say start the presentation with a very brief idea of the concepts of extremism and radicalization to violence. Then I'll talk about Bangladesh-Canada context, followed by exclusively Canadian context of extremism and violence and prevention. And I'll finally finish by a couple of lessons learned. This is really problematic. As a professor at Political Studies Department and University of Winnipeg, I do teach a course each year since 2019. It is titled Special Topics in Geopolitics. So in that topic, I do talk a lot about terrorism and counterterrorism. And the very definition is problematic in a sense that context of terrorism and political violence varies. There is no the definition. Mark Schmidt's famous work, if you are following him, he has actually compiled over 100 definitions of terrorism in his early book in 2012 or 13. Just imagine how terrorism, the word itself, is defined in such a variety of ways. And that is why it is very important that when we discuss about terrorism and extremism and violence, we limit our perceptions and concepts to a framework so that we can understand each other better. These perceptual definitions, the reason I call perceptual, because it is also a perception, a concept, particularly Canadian government has adopted at this point in time as we speak. It might change over 5 years or 3 years, I don't know, tomorrow. The whole definition might change. And this is why the perception of this whole matter is really important. So as I said, just to lay the background, extremism is a culturally relative term that is subjective, emotionally laden, and often pejorative. Many scholars have come to a single consensus on this matter, subjective. We really cannot objectify a philosophical and perceptual concept like extremism. However, what we generally agree that extremist beliefs are dependent on perspective. The person who holds views which are considered to be extreme within one cultural context or time may not be considered to hold extremist belief with another cultural context or time. The famous dialogue or the quote that one country's or one nation's terrorist is another country's freedom fighter. So this is why it is very, very different and difficult to define extremism. However, what I personally believe, and as a public safety lead of a project that I'm currently running over the last 2 years, we have defined extremism something related with violence when a person adopts certain viewpoints or worldviews which is connected with the concept of violence, then we term it as extremism. Because anything can be extreme ideas, and there are many ways to define extremism. Next comes the concept of radicalization. So radicalization, what we call here, is a process of adopting an extremist belief system. And this belief system, again, can vary from places to places. Radicalism is not something criminal in nature at all, because this term is often used to denote the activities of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, etc., etc. Even in the case of Bangladesh, the father of the nation might have been called extremist and radical by the then Pakistani government, and we have all these bios that we see. So this radical thing is not sort of we cannot use it as in a pejorative way. But as I said, the connecting point is if this belief system is diverted to violence, then it is a radicalization. However, it is a process. One cannot become radical within 24 hours span or time. Finally, violent radicalization is defined, of course, I have taken it from the United States because this is most relevant. It is the process of adopting or promoting an extremist belief system for the purpose of facilitating ideologically based violence in order to advance political, religious, social change. folks remember this last very word, social change, social transformation of a system. If something can be done violently, then it is a problem. Social change is always desirable because society evolves, society improves. It's not a linear something, right? I mean, it progresses, and we all love social changes. We cannot expect a society of 70s to remain in 2020s, right? Because these changes are expected, and we all have to expect it, and in some way or other. But the point is, what are the methods of achieving such changes? If it is some violent method, here we have problems. Non-violently, all changes are welcome and well understood. Next, I will just spend very quickly on this slide. And as I said to your prof, that I will send her the PowerPoint slides today after the discussion in PDF form. She can distribute it to you so that you can also go back at some point in time if you need. So here I'll just talk about factors. Again, this resource has been taken from Canadian government's public safety website, which is very comprehensive in terms of definitions and some of the tools and methods that Canadian government uses. So here you see there are 5 factors that they mentioned, Canadian government, in the website: social networks, grievances, vulnerabilities, sense of belonging, and inclination to violence. Social networks. In today's world, we all are part of some networks. I think you all would agree with me, but if you don't, please raise this question in Q&A session. We all are part of something, somewhere, in some way. And this is really ubiquitous because we cannot live possibly today without any network. We all have, I mean, despite of our ages, our education, our social and economic status and position in the social hierarchy, we do belong to some networks. And likewise, for all benign networks, there are networks of extreme people. Especially in the West, when we study these groups, we often sort of study the way they talk in their social groups, in the WhatsApp, in Signal, in Telegram, in many of these chat forums like 8chan and 4chan and 8chan, which was very infamous. And initially, many of the Western extreme and neo-Nazi groups organized themselves through 4chan and 8chan. So when we study these things, it is a huge network of extremist people talking about extreme ideas and socio-political changes. And this is important factor in terms of radicalization to violence. Grievances. Political grievances are super important. 2 aspects. Grievances can be local, can be global. For example, in the West, many of the narratives of the foreign fighters to 2015 and onward, 14 and onward, what we saw, there are grievances expressed by these folks when they joined ISIS in Syria. What kind of political grievances? The grievances include mostly in the West is discrimination, racism, hatred, minority violence. So these are the common types of grievances that we always heard from the fighters, those who joined ISIS and so on and so forth. So the point is, or the lesson is, grievances can be real or perceived. 2 types. So perceived grievances are very difficult to deal with, whereas real grievances is easy because and you can take measures to eradicate that sort of grievances. But the problem is perceived grievances. And remember, folks, perceived grievances are created by someone or some group. It is manufactured. The way we manufacture, we create stories. Grievances are also stories created in different form. Vulnerabilities, we often see young folks are vulnerable for various reasons. In the West and East, it is sort of quite, I would say, a universal factor. And this vulnerability comes from, as I said, socio-political situation, the education, the push and pull factors in the society present any given time, and so on and so forth. This is a long list of vulnerabilities. But we should be aware that vulnerabilities does matter. Vulnerability creates a person, very much keen to take, lessons or the call for recruitment by the extreme groups. Sense of belongings very important in the West, not in a large way. Countries like Bangladesh and others, where you have a homogeneous group of people living in a single, country with, as I said, homogeneous, not multicultural. But in Canada, in the West, there are hundreds of groups of people live together. As you understand, it's a multicultural country. So here, the sense of belonging is not easy things to understand and to culture and to nurture together, because sense of belongings is really perceptive, and it depends on the context, political, economic, and so on and so forth. And finally, inclination towards violence. Well, some of the studies say that some people are really prone to violence, meaning they prefer to adopt violence instead of non-violence to solve any problem. So it is sort of psychological explanation, but it has some support, and it is supported by sort of evidences from research from the health and well-being perspective, especially in the West. In many of the lone attackers, what we found that they were really suffering from mental issues, and they needed mental health support before the attack. In this slide, folks, I just wanted to show you the evolution of violent extremism in the West in general, but globally, because this impacts many countries in the world, not only the Western countries. So if you see from the left of the slide in your screen, I started plotting around 5 years of span and tried to denote what happened or what are the rise and fall of the extremism. So if you look from the left, jihadist and Al-Qaeda and its affiliates were very much predominant in the first 5 years after 9/11 attack. And it is also connected with Western military interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan, because these are tied, because these both have given rise to terrorism, especially the international terrorism. We all know famously that the rise of ISIS actually happened in Camp Bucca in Syria, Iraq. So the next 5 years is between 2006 and 11, where mostly the groups from Africa gained prominence, and they have had their networks in US and Canada as well, especially the Twin City, Minnesota, and some of the cases from Toronto. We have seen that people have joined from that groups. And also don't forget that during this period, the birth of ISIS actually happened. And of course, the Arab Spring, which has toppled many of the military dictators around the world, and also in turn destabilized many of the countries such as Syria, Libya, and Tunisia, Algeria. So Tunisia, Algeria is kind of stable nowadays, but Syria is still unstable, and Libya is still, struggling. Next 5 years, 11 to 16, the rise of ISIS, and this infamous phenomena of foreign fighters happened. This is pretty unique because from Canada, if we go back in middle of 30s, 1932 and 4, at that time, the phenomena of foreign fighters actually happened. And we call them Gatineau, so Papineau Brigade, if I'm not wrong. So folks from Canada joined and traveled abroad to fight against Franco's fascist regime in Spain. And it is historically noted. So these are the first foreign fighters from Canada. So fast forward in today's, between 11 and 16, we have seen in total, as reported by government agencies, 180 Canadians joined ISIS teams in Syria. And it is from Canada only, but in many of these Western nations, we know at the peak point, it was around 22,000 to 25,000 foreign fighters were fighting in line with, in support of ISIS. So that is the period that you might note. And then comes another 5 years, 16 to 21, the rise of Donald Trump in America, and of course, the appearance of right-wing extremism in the political landscape of Western countries, especially North America. And it is coupled with extensive Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. So these two notions, what we call hate, I will briefly talk in one of the slides that you will find how hate has given rise to extremism and violence. And as of now, what we see after 2021, right-wing extremism, neo-Nazism, and very interestingly, I'll tell you today what is happening here in terms of freedom movement. You see the term freedom movement, and it's very, I would say, interesting. So, July 1st, 2016, I was in Winnipeg, as usually. And when the news came, I was really, really surprised for two reasons. First, I know we have had issues with JMB between, first 10 years in the millennia, but I never imagined that a person from Bangladesh would be leading this attack in Bangladesh. His name is Samim Chaudhry, as all of you are aware. And I think I would like to show you a video clip. So I'll stop share this slide quickly. And just give me 1 sec here so that I can go. Can you see the slide now? The video, Tasmia?
Yes, sir.
For a closer look at the situation in Bangladesh, we're joined by Amarnath Amar Singham. He's a fellow at George Washington University's program on extremism. Let's start with the presence, Amarnath, of ISIS in the country. It's been on the rise for about a year now. What can you tell us about ISIS in Bangladesh?
So they began in Bangladesh in September 2015 when official ISIS channels kind of announced the launch of what they called Wilayat Hind, or the Indian province of the Islamic State. And so from September 2015 to today, they've launched dozens of attacks, mostly on activists, Shia mosques, Ahmadiyya mosques, and Christian targets, and so on. And so attacks have been on the rise.
The Bangladeshi government has repeatedly denied any suggestion that ISIS is in Bangladesh. Why this stance with evidence to the contrary?
I think for them, it's an issue of holding on to power, protecting economic development in the country, and to suggest that there is a presence of international terrorist organizations within the country, they feel kind of threatens that. And so what they've done is they've denied the existence of these groups, but at the same time have said, this is a homegrown problem, and a lot of these terrorist groups have ties to previous terrorist organizations like JMB and these other groups that have been active in Bangladesh before. So they haven't denied the existence of terrorism, just that these groups have links to ISIS or Al-Qaeda.
Let's talk about a possible Canadian connection here. You believe there's a Canadian link to the leadership of this terror group in Bangladesh. What can you tell us about that?
So for about a year now, I've been watching or trying to find more information about this guy named Tamim Chowdhury, who's from Windsor, Ontario, and very recently, some of the Bangladeshi sources and journalists have also placed him as the leadership of ISIS in Bangladesh. And so attacks like the one we saw yesterday, in theory could be organized and orchestrated by someone like him. There's very little known about him in terms of biographical details. We know he's from Bangladesh. We know he's from Windsor. We know he's
originally from Bangladesh.
And that we know he's back in Bangladesh. And we know he's a leader of ISIS in Bangladesh, or one of the leaders of ISIS in Bangladesh. But in terms of when he arrived in Canada, whether he was born in Canada, when he left Canada to go back to Bangladesh, a lot of that still needs to be filled in.
Are you certain about the connection? And can you tell us how you discovered this?
So through interviews with a few friends of his in Windsor, in the Windsor Muslim community, as well as some contacts. Interviews I've been doing with fighters and so on in Syria, I've been able to piece some details of his life together, and I'm fairly confident it's the same person and that it is the leadership and so on. But yeah, in terms of more specific details,
yeah, I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this in the coming days. Thank you for joining us. Amarnath Amarsingham is a fellow at George Washington University's program on extremism.
So that was a brief, interview that Amar gave to a media outlet back right after the attack. So what I'll do is I will explain a little bit the context, but before that, let me put on the slide again. Okay. Is the slide visible again, Tasmia?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. So you folks, you have just listened to a clip of an expert. Professor Amarnath teaches at Queen's University now, and we know each other, of course, but this is the context, right? Background. And here you see the gentleman, Tamim Chaudhry. I think I have a slide in more details. So this is another news from CP24. So brief biography is Tamim Chaudhry was actually born in Canada in Windsor, and he moved back to Bangladesh in 2013, allegedly to lead the attack and organize new GMB. And he is, of course, responsible for 1st July attack and 7th July attack in an Eid congregation. And the same, I have given you the web link. You can read the details there. But it was mentioned in this news that his grandparents were against the liberation of Bangladesh from Pakistan. And to the best of my knowledge, so his family comes from Windsor. It's a province near Toronto, city within Greater Toronto area. So just bordering US, Michigan state. So this is the major event that connected Canada and Bangladesh together in terms of terror activities. What you see in the screen now is Canadian government's listing of terror entities. So if you click this website, which I pasted the link below, you will come across a long list of terror entities that Canadian Public Safety, ministry often revises, adds, and deletes. So this is the list. And here, what we see, group was added on 3rd of February 2021. Is called Islamic State Bangladesh, which is again quite a surprise for me. I have spoken to many in my circle, especially in my research areas, to understand more about existence of this group as of today in Bangladesh, and how public safety should review its case of terror entities. Nonetheless, as of today, this list is up there, and it shows that there is a presence of ISIS in Bangladesh till today. I think this is the last slide, and I will give you more details down the road. But you might be aware that in 22 February, January, end of January and February, we had an extraordinary movement in Canada, what we call, or what we dub, is Freedom Convoy. So a group of right-wing white supremacist people gathered together in very large number, and they kind of seized our capital and various cities across the board, and they have their different agenda. But the most important and funny part, I would say funny in a sense that I never realized that Bangladesh group would be interested in Freedom Convoy, because it's pretty, I would say, extreme group in terms of their ideologies. But here it is, reported in Financial Express. There is a Bangladeshi digital marketing firm involved in fundraising. And this whole freedom movement actually raised close to 18 million Canadian dollars. And I don't know how much this group got into, but this is also reported, and which connects Bangladesh with Canada. Good. So now sort of a very general discussion that in Canada, because we are talking about extremism and violence in the West now. So in Canada, this is the list of competing social conflict. The reason I say social conflict, because I define social conflict as the incompatibility of the objectives and goals of various social groups living in a particular place. So given that definition, what I see, Trump effect, the refugee crisis, Black Lives Matters, indigenous resistance, COVID-19, and finally convoy movement. And here I would like to remember and acknowledge Professor Dr. Barbara Perry, who is the Canadian chair in hate and bias and extremism. She came to our event on March 9th, and I also attended a workshop on March 26th, I believe, in Oshawa, Ontario. And I have, I'm going to use some of our slides because these are super relevant in this presentation. So she also mentioned similar things in her presentation, that we are going through some of these things. And I think these are pretty much self-explanatory. I'm not going to discuss very many aspects of these things, except two things. Black Lives Matters, BLM movement, what we call, it's a very popular movement grown out of the killing of George Floyd in the US back in 2020. And then onward throughout North America, but there is a large body of people do subscribe them to the Black Lives movement. And it is Black Lives Matters. It is particularly to raise concern about socio-political issues of Black people in the North America. And convoy movement, as I said, that mostly it is a mixture of people, those who aspire some extreme ideas about Canada and its freedom. Moving on to the next slide, hate and extremism, which is sort of our current discourse in North America. Hate is absolutely a social psychological phenomena, but what Dr. Barbara Perry is talking about in terms of hate and extremism, according to her deliberation, she sees Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in the rise, cancel culture. I added this part myself because something is happening in North America that in many of the public institutions, universities, people are really not very happy if something goes against their ideas and ideologies. So there would be a lot of discussions, opposition, resistance. For example, you have invited a professor who is really right-wing, who has right-wing beliefs and sort of thing, or let's say environmental or LGBTQ supporter or non-supporter. So in those cases, what we are seeing nowadays in the campuses, a lot of resistance to have these speakers to speak. Because in the West, we do value freedom of expression, and we keep it in a very extreme position, because this is what really is important in the public institutions in Canada. So there is always, we see that resistance in our educational institutions to let these people come and speak. Right-wing extremism, I hope you guys are aware of this phenomena. What we basically term is again an umbrella term, and we can group right-wing political parties, neo-Nazis groups, the white supremacist group, and also importantly, there's another thing came up is what we call conspiracy theorists, and it is usually known as QAnon, Q-A-N-O-N. So QAnon, since it is not a group, I didn't mention it in this slide, but the point is many of the many people in the West do talk about conspiracy theories, and they rally people behind any cause using conspiracy theories. Especially during the COVID-19, the rise of conspiracy theorists saw its maximum, and it is really important that you folks should be aware of these things. And of course, we have anti-fascist movement in response to right-wing extremism and these kind of things happening in the West. And anti-fascist groups are commonly known as Antifa in short in the West, and they have their own groups and they gather together to oppose right-wing and neo-Nazi demonstrations and congregations in many of the Western cities. If you see this slide, between 2009 and 2020, police reported hate crimes in Canada is increasing. So it is, the data is taken from Dr. Barbara Perry's slide, but you can find it yourself in Statistics Canada's website. In 2020, look at the rise from 1,500, it is over 2,500. So hate crime is a crime according to Canadian Penal Code. And it's a criminal, if you are charged against hate crime, you will have a prison sentence. And if you just type in Google the definition of hate crime, it is there. With regards to hate crime, the cornerstone is it will be considered a crime if somebody attacks someone based on the race, gender, ethnicity, and any distinguishable hallmarks of a person. So anything related to this will be considered as a hate crime. But one thing I would like to draw to your attention here is that people often do not report hate crime in Canada for many reasons. And the statistics that you guys are seeing here is from police. So I don't want to say that police does a very good job in bookkeeping, but the idea is that we do have some statistics now, but a large portion of people do not even report hate crime because who wants to get involved with police and etc. So there is a whole gray area of statistics that we don't know actually how many hate crime happen in Canada. Again, percentage in number of police reported hate motivated crime compared with other crimes. Just imagine in Canada, generally, the crime is declining, but hate crime is increasing. And look at the chart, the yellow bars, I don't know if you can see it properly. The yellow bars actually denote hate motivated crime plotted between January 20 and December 21 year period. And we see in most of the cases, it is increasing, and particularly after June, between June to December 2020. And it's just before COVID-19. And I'm sorry, I don't have very latest data. I don't think anybody's compiling has compiled so far, but this is what I have now. And again, it is taken from Dr. Barbara Perry's slide. What are the motivations of hate crime? Race and ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, sex or gender, and other motivation. And again, it is from Dr. Perry's slide, but what we can see here is that in 2020, the rise of hate crime based on race and ethnicity, and if you can see, the purple slide is the highest, around 1,600. So that is the peak in terms of race and ethnicity. And in terms of religious attack, 2017 is the highest. And remember, at that time, ISIS and other activities were in full swing, and Trump's group just came into power. So right-wing rhetorics were very prevalent. I think this is the reason that it topped up. And in terms of sexual orientation, what we call LGBTQ rights, we see a rise in, I think in 2020, maximum, 2019 and 20 maximum, and others motivation. You have the what you call explanation of many things, including political beliefs, but these are not significant. But what is significant is in the left part of the slide is the rise of race and ethnicity related attack. In 2021, Dr. Barbara Perry shows a comparative analysis. In the left, what she's saying that racially motivated hate crime is up 6% against Arab and West Asian people, is about 46% rise against South Asian 21% and Southeast Asian 16%. And in terms of religiously motivated hate crime, it is up 67%, and anti-Muslim attack or hate crime is 71%, but a very large jump is happening with regards to anti-Catholic group to 60%. And of course, anti-gay hate crime is up again 64%. What are the harms of hate-related crimes and hate-related matters? The harm is done to the person who is affected, right? And it is either from personal harassment from the online spaces where this kind of hostility can be exchanged. The risk that those who counter it may be radicalized by it, become more sympathetic and possibly even active. The effect that it has on the values and culture of the online spaces and where it happens, and the effect it has on public discourse and polarization. Because hate-related discourse regarding ethnicity and race, as you see, the highest we have just showed you in the one of the slides. So if it goes on, it really divides the society, because Canada is highly multicultural, but with regards to hate crime, people will take sides, right? Black people or Asian people, they will take sides, and the society becomes more polarized. Right-wing extremism, as I said, Dr. Barbara Perry shows 2,467 accounts and channels and pages that she observed and her group observed and researched. Just imagine the number of such groups. And on average, these channels posted 61,936 times their messages. These include 4,036 posts, and so many tweets and so on and so forth. And it attracted nearly 1 million people with regards to retweets, comments, and likes. And just imagine, out of these, nearly 2,000 posts contained hateful, racial slur, and 651 posts were explicitly hostile towards individual or group of people, i.e. minorities. And of course, this slide is taken from Dr. Barbara Perry. Now let's also quickly define what does right-wing extremism really mean here in the West. It is, of course, a loose movement. I mean, there is no one group or two groups like established political parties, and then you can pinpoint those groups. It's a very loose movement, but it is characterized by racially, ethnically, and sexually defined nationalism, which is the cardinal fact in terms of right-wing extremism. In Europe, in Americas, in Canada, in UK, whatever discourse you see with regards to right-wing politics, it is about nationalism. It is about tribalism. It is about defining own group superior to others. And own group, i.e., is only white people. Only white people have the superiority in terms of race, and therefore they deserve the right to have their own place, which they call ethno-nationalism. So this is the hallmark of all the right-wing group that you see in the West. As Dr. Barbara Perry rightly mentioned, nationalism is often—
Dr. Kausar, do you have any problem of internet?
Can you hear?
Can all of us hear Dr. Kausar?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sometime I hope that there is some internet issue.
Okay, Tasmia, could you hear my previous slides?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Okay, should I go on? Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
So you folks can hear me, right, students?
Yes,
Yes,
sir, we can hear you.
Tasmia, ask you students, but I think sometimes the professional.
Okay, good. So let's continue, but do let me know if you don't hear. Just raise your hand, and I will repeat or I'll go back. Okay. Great. So what I was telling you about right-wing extremism, as it is synonymous to white power. So white power, i.e., is again an umbrella term that most of the right-wing groups use in their narratives, in their discourses in social media. Nationalism, with regards to these groups, assumes as perceived threats to non-whites, Muslims, Jews and immigrants, homosexuals and feminists, amongst others. Because this group perceive that they are threatened by all others. And when they say threatened, means the white identity is threatened. And extremists are willing to assume both offensive and defensive stance. In interviewing some of the groups in Canada, even, we have seen that they say, look, we are not bad, we are not racist, but what we want is a separate place for white people, because white people are being replaced by others. Here I refer the famous replacement theory written and advanced by, there's a gentleman in France, and his name is, I'm trying to remember his name. He is a journalist. He's not an academic sort of person, but his whole idea that white race is being replaced by immigrants, non-whites, does really matter. Because if you remember the New Zealand Christchurch attack, the attack of, in other places in the US, all were, have that manifestos. And in the manifestos, the attackers really mention about the concept of white replacement. And the last part, what Barbara Perry is showing, that these whole groups, all these right-wing groups, talk about their own homeland. And this is what they call in terms of ethno-nationalism. This is a fascinating slide prepared by Dr. Barbara Perry. And she shows a whole, plethora of right-wing and non-right-wing even. For example, if you talk about accelerationist group, so the accelerationist group thinks that right-wing movement is not good because it is slow. It takes decades to come to power, to impact social change. So what they advocate is rapid change through violence. So it is really interesting the way they advance their ideologies. Then you have conspiracy and anti-hate mandate ideologues, gender defender, anti-authority. And something also we see in the West is that anti-government movement is gaining a lot of attention in today's world. And there are many groups evolving, those who only say that we do not like government because the government is bad. We want to have a different type of government. But anyways, these are some of the groups that Dr. Barbara Perry mentioned in our previous presentations. Here you see the distribution of these groups, mostly in the West, in the eastern side. You see Toronto and Quebec province, 75-50, and if you take the eastern provinces, so this is the highest concentration of right-wing and white supremacist group in Canada, so it is in the east. And if you see the distribution, again, you'll find the, in terms of events or incidences, again in Toronto area is the maximum, then Quebec areas, and of course some part in British Columbia. So what are the characteristics? So according to Dr. Barbara Perry, the growth in numbers, too many groups nowadays, many groups. and they have their chapters. They have, they have become small and small because government does, monitor this group, and there are a number of groups also entered in the terror entity. So they've become atomized, what we call smaller. Then demographic shift is also important amongst these groups members. What we see nowadays, there are older generation people have joined these kind of groups. They are mostly educated and well employed. So they are well employed. They don't have that, poverty which drives radicalization. So they don't belong to that group at all. And many of these groups have coalitions. And most dangerous part is the last point, arms training. So these groups are also using arms. They get together in a place and they train their people in arms. So I think this is the last slide in this category. So the group's claim of membership is increasing in the West. I think it is kind of consistent in many of the large groups. But as I said, if government cracks down in smaller groups, then they dissipate, they evolve, and they form another small group and they might join the coalition. And just an example, Barbara Perry is citing here, La Motte is in Quebec province. They have 75 members. And most importantly, in Canadian Armed Forces, what we also see, the infiltration of such ideas and membership. Around 53 Canadian Armed Forces members, according to MPCI's report of 2018, shows that they have joined this ideological group. And of course, this is a list of high-profile cases. Dr. Barbara Perry, you don't have to go into all these details, just showing you what is happening here. Now the convoy. So according to Dr. Barbara Perry, which is very similar to my own research as well, this whole group is, as I said, a loose coalition of people, just people, random people from various right-wing or right political parties group. So they have a far-right imagery. They used Confederate flags, swastikas, and all Gladstone's flags. It's with a snake. It's a very popular flag used by right-wing groups. And they have groups within them, the Plate Army, Canada First, QAnon, and most infamously Diagolon. And we have seen in the last year what happened with the leadership. You have the list of them, and all of them are kind of tied to some homophobia. As you see, Tamara Leach is a declared Islamophobe, and others do subscribe. The leadership of Freedom Convoy movement do subscribe to some right-wing extremist group as well. In terms of recruitment, they target youth, former active military, law enforcement, and of course vulnerable population. And this is also a research done by Dr. Barbara Perry. I'm just sharing her slides. And it is really important to share with you that in the West, these groups openly recruit people and promote their ideas. As you see, it's a poster, public leaflet that we found in some of the cities. Again, this was taken from Dr. Barbara Perry's slide, but this is the idea that it is pretty much open thing in the West with regards to recruitment. Of course, in-person recruitment happens, especially in my city, the neo-Nazi group, the base, when they first started recruitment, they actually met one of the journalists who went undercover to infiltrate the group. So his name is Ryan Thorpe from Winnipeg Free Press. So he was interviewed in person by the recruiter in a public park. And of course, online is very important. The platform itself, you have social media apps, websites, music, and last but not important, the least, most important part is gaming. So many of the groups kind of gather together and play games and talk to each other. So it is a very perennial threat to Canadian security, and of course, in general in society, because young people, even at the age of 10, 11, can be exposed to hate and extremism through this. And this is also taken from Barbara Perry's slide. So what we can do in terms of challenging hate in the West. Here's the list suggested by Dr. Barbara Perry. I totally agree with her. We need to talk about political leadership. We should have national action plan. We want to have multi-sectoral partnership. That what she means is actually not only from government side, but also NGO side, from the education sectors, and so on and so forth. We have to really counter hate online as well, because if hate groups, extremist group want to recruit people online through their messages, on the other side, we should have also the capacity to counter their messages. And of course, here we call critical literacy and social media skills, and enforcing legislation is very, very important. In Canada, it is growing quite a bit of, I would say, getting attention from the policymakers. They are thinking about content moderation and also charging people, those who spread hate and extremism. And before I leave you, I would also like to tell you that you might encounter these words or the terminologies. CVE means countering violent extremism, and PCV means prevention and countering violent extremism. So these are various words used by British government, Americans, New Zealand, Australia. But in general, these governments have started designing intervention since 2010, I would say, more actively and I would say more intently. And nowadays in Canada, what we call all the right-wing extremist groups in one umbrella, we call them ideologically motivated violent extremist group, in short IMVE. So IMVE denotes all these loosely organized groups together. And the reason Canadian government talks about IMVE, because these groups, their main ideology is their philosophy of homophobia, transphobia, and anti-government extremism. A couple of, 2 slides just about my own research in this sector. So you can find me, if you Google me, my name, Professor with a Toolkit, sort of keyword, key phrase. You will find my number of interviews in the mainstream media in 2022 and onward. I have spoken to most of the networks in Canada, including US, in Europe, New Zealand. I have been interviewed and I have discussed about my project. So in this project, what we are doing is we are developing a toolkit to educate teachers in the school to counter radicalization to violence amongst their students. So the toolkit is in the final stage, and this project is funded by Public Safety Canada. It's over, it's a 4 years project, and we have finished second year. So I'm the public lead of the project lead of this public safety project. And after the toolkit, we are going to run a number of workshops. And our basic philosophy is that if we can educate teachers what is happening around in the society amongst their children, students, then it is easier to intervene. And I think, so here is one of my interviews. If you're interested, you can have a look. I've given the web link. Here in this interview, again in a national media source, I was talking about the dangers of Freedom Convoy movement. And it was recorded last year in March, I think. And what I spoke is that the trucker convoy or the Freedom Convoy is a national security threat to Canada. I think final slide, some of the lessons learned. Folks, remember, extremism and violence is an old matter. Each society, each century has their own pattern of extremism and violence. Nothing new to human condition. So we have to understand and acclimatize ourselves about the current pattern of extremism and violence. Social context of grievance is important. And as I said in the beginning, grievance can be perceived, can be real. it is difficult to deal with perceptions or the perceived grievances rather than real. But at the end of the day, the general lesson in the West and in the East is that someone should listen to grievances of people, whether it is individual, group, or society. So grievance matters, because recruiters, when they recruit, they use the grievance as their foremost motivational activity. Foremost. Limits of freedom, even in Canada, where freedom of expression is enshrined in our 1982 Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's enshrined, one of the fundamental principles of Canadian societies and Canadian Canada as well. But we have a limit of freedom. In the name of freedom of speech, you cannot promote hate. And in Canada, they have defined, the government has defined, the Supreme Court of Canada has defined what are hates. As I said in the beginning, race, gender, ethnicity, religion, and any identifiable characteristics of any group. So promoting hate is a crime. It is not freedom of expression in Canada. Educational intervention is the most prudent way, because through education, whether it is West or East, you can talk about these things. You can talk about the dangers. If you don't want to talk about extremism with your children, with your students, then what will happen is they will find it themselves. Don't forget, all of you in our class, how many? 56, except to your prof and Colonel Zahir and myself, 53 of you. 53 of you, I'm sure you have your cell phone in hand or your any digital platform, and you are searching whatever I have told so far. So if your prof and myself and Colonel Zahir, if we don't want to talk about extremism and violence, etc., you will find out where are the sources. It is as easy. It was not easy 30 years ago, but it is super easy now. So what I suggest, do talk about the dangers of extremism whenever you have scope. A mix of hard and soft approach is needed. Often we sort of convolute these two approaches together. We think sometimes, no, just incarcerate and kill. But it is not going to end the root causes of problem. Soft approach is also needed. I'm not overruling the hard approach because it pertains to national security. What I'm advocating is that in line with the approach of national security, within this framework of national security, one approach could be soft, talking to guardians, talking to local leaders, faith leaders, and teachers about this problem, because this is a social problem where everybody is impacted. Remember, after the July 1st attack, there were events where Bangladesh government had to stop some of the schools. And I have all the list because I published a chapter on it later on when I was delivering a lecture in Germany right after this, I think 2017. And this list of schools in Bangladesh have a whole bunch of students, right? And Bangladesh government had to really crack down on those schools. So in terms of intervention, soft approach really yields good results if you can use it judiciously. And finally, in the West, what we call a whole of society approach. And here is not only law enforcement or intelligence groups and etc. We talk about not-for-profit organization, research institutes, public institutions, to talk about and find out what is the best strategy to intervene in extremism. And finally, I'm a big proponent of community-based intervention to counter radicalization. I have published a book and collaborating with 2 other professors from US, and you can just find it in Amazon as well if you want. We have interviewed 37 community programs in 8 countries. And in these interviews, it's a qualitative study. In the interviews, we have spoken with the team leads of those 36 projects, and they have consistently said 2 things. Community-focused, community-based intervention is sustainable in terms of radicalization prevention. Sustainable because the activities, the outputs remain with the community. And second thing is, direct approach of intervention is not sustainable. A state, a government, a political party cannot eradicate extremism directly, just cannot, because it is not sustainable. So I think with this, I will end my session here of talking and talking. I'm sure I have not bored you in the month of Ramadan. So now it is your turn to have questions and answers. I'll try my best to answer. I might not have all the answers, but I'll do my best. Tasmia, back to you.
Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful lecture session. So if you have any questions or queries, Professor, so you can just raise your hand and I can get back to you.
No questions?
Sir, if you allow, I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, sir. So I've learned about your educational intervention, the project EMCA. Yeah, that how you have been intervening in different institutions, training the educators, mentors, providing them training. So there is an issue with CV approaches as far as I have learned. That, for example, in case of UK Prevent, that has been largely questioned with the issue of increasing further stigmatization of a certain community through CV approaches. Whenever you're targeting a certain community, you're talking about growth of Islamism, radicalization. So you are basically pointing out to the specific Muslim community in a country that is very much prominent in prevent approach. So I was just curious that how actually are you dealing with this kind of problem?
No, thank you. It's a good question. So let me distinguish two different approaches. So what you are referring to, British, I'm very aware of it because in our 2018 research, which came out as a book, we have actually interviewed 5 projects in the UK, mainland UK. So the British government, right from the beginning, they started, now we call it a very weird idea that people should report about their students, their co-workers in the hospital, because NSH was also involved, and especially their channel program, which is targeted in the institutions. And in general, as you rightly mentioned, British government say, I mean, their program is called Prevent, a national strategy. So within this channel program used in the schools and institutions, that people should refer, what they call referrals. So for example, in your class, you have seen, I don't know, Mr. X or Mrs. Y, and you think that this person might be radical or extreme. So now you fill up a form, and this form goes to the some bodies, and they come and interview your referrals and all this, so on and so forth. It is actually, it has serious backlash, and it backfired actually, and I don't know what is the outcome of this whole program. And just for a reference, if you search in Google, you will find there was a public inquiry held in Britain in order to understand the effectiveness of channel program. I think they've already stopped this program. However, stigmatizing a particular society was very rampant. And until 2015-16, especially in the West, it was all about Muslims. It was all about Muslim groups. But remember, this happened because of the context. Remember, the past 15-16 years from 2001, it was all over the world, the intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the rise of AQ and what you call, not rise, the operations of AQ and AQ's chapters, AQIP, AQAP, even Al-Qaeda in Indian subcontinent. So all these things tied to identity of of a particular religion or religious group. So possibly this is why many of the programs run in the West in terms of intervention was focused on Muslims. But it changed from 16 onward. We see in the West, there's a rapid change. Nowadays, you will not find except America, if I recall correctly, except America and some of the strategies in most of the Western countries, they do not use any kind of terminologies pertaining to Islam or Muslims. Rather, it's an umbrella term with regards to extremism. And as I said, nowadays we call it ideologically motivated violent extremism, IMV. So there is a change happened, but you are right that how to deal with these things, because, and this is why, my approach is totally different. I'm not talking about a community. I'm talking about students from, range of, ethnicity and, what you call economic groups. So all these students are my fellow, participants in these activities. And I have gotten rid of the whole targeting on a particular ethnic group.
Okay, thank you, sir,
No worries.
for the answer. I can see 2 hands. So Fahad, please.
Hello, sir. Firstly, thank you for your amazing session. We have learned so much from it. So in a third world country like us, what we can see, starting from factors to the rest of the parts to countering violent extremism, and including the reasons or other fields in extremism, there is, I can see some dissimilarities, of course, and in many cases, there are some vital differences. So my question is, can we actually use this Western framework, or should we develop rather a separate framework to counter this extremism? Because if we are going to follow this Western framework, that how would we decide what to take and what not?
No, it's absolutely a valid question, Mr. Fahad. Thank you for raising these differences. Of course, there is a difference. Of course, the contexts are different, right? Think about Bangladesh and Canada. It's absolutely 2 different societies. In Bangladesh, think about demography. It's 90%, over 90% homogeneous group. In Bangladesh, all of us, we talk about one single ethnic group, right? We look similar, we speak similar, we eat similar things, we read in one language, right? We speak in the same language. But think about Canada. Even Canada is such a large country, 10 provinces, 3 territories. Let me talk about only one province where I live. It's in the middle of the center of the country. And here is over 50, 60 nations or people from 60 nations, those who are living here in this particular province. Think about the varieties of people that we have in Canada in a particular province or city. So context is very different. In Canada, multiculturalism is sort of one of the distinguishing features of Canadian government, Canadian identity, multiculturalism, because of various people. But again, it is a weakness, because if you remember in the slide of factors, I have shown that sense of belongingness is little difficult to achieve in Canada rather than in Bangladesh. However, in terms of developing framework, I totally agree with you. Each country, each society must have their own ways of understanding extremism and its prevention. One model cannot be copied and pasted in other model because of the fundamental difference of contexts, the fundamental difference of types of people who live in 2 different things. And remember, folks, I have no prescription today. Remember, I have not told you anything. I just showed you the differences in these 2 situations. But Mr. Fahad, there are some common grounds. If you remember, in the intervention ways, for example, the thing I do in Canada, I think it can be done in Bangladesh as well. Think about a project that you have taken that you can go to schools like middle to high schools and talk to young people that, look, extremism looks like this, the factors are like this, social media training is like that. Don't you think it is quite identical? Because similar thing I'm doing here. I'm going to schools, And of course, it's an advanced society in terms of resources and technology, but still, we are talking about media literacy, critical thinking. So you can do the same thing in Bangladesh too. So there are some common features in terms of intervention that can be co-opted in both these societies. Lastly, I would only say that political willingness is actually the deciding factor. Remember, in all these nations that we have in the world, in each countries, the political group that leads a particular country, they have their own ideas and philosophies of intervention, right? So that is also matters, because in Canada, it is quite, I would say, distinguishable when Conservative Party in the federal level only, I'm talking about federal level, the Conservative Party was in power. Their strategy of intervention of extremism is quite different than the Liberal Party, which is ruling now. So the Liberal Party of Canada has different ideas than that of Conservative Party. And even if you come down to provincial level in Alberta, the political party which is leading their political system for some time, it is very pro-right. And the current premier of Alberta, she is actually, she loves right-wing groups. She often talks to them. And very recently, we have a 11 minutes phone discussion of her leaked somewhere. I've gotten hold of it. And you can listen to her, the way she was talking to one of the right-wing leaders. So political willingness, Mr. Fahad, is also very important, but which is also identical in the West and in the East. So there is no kind of differences in terms of political willingness. So far, you understand and you think that intervention is necessary. I hope I could explain.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fahad, for the question. I think Ashikur Rahman, did you raise your hand?
Assalamu alaikum.
Awesome.
Very good evening, Professor.
Thank you.
Ashik, can you open your video, please? Or you have any serious problem?
Actually, if I'll be opening up my video, there will have a problem of internet connection.
Oh, I see. I see.
Because due to a poor network connection.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry for this. I hope it will not create
No
disturbance. I am not willing to talk as the way my prior question was. Rather, I was more interested in the epistemological understanding of terrorism, extremism, or can be radicalization. Whatever it is, we do call it as terrorism. The way we do define terrorism is often gets a difference irrespective of the areas and geopolitical aspects. And even few moments ago, you have also talked about the political willingness and various factors you have also discussed. So terrorism, so far, we do not get a concrete definition of the term. And mostly the great powers yet have not come forward to create a convention, although the United States had taken an initiative to do something of such kind, but no response from the great powers is making it a null and void one. So to what extent, my question is now, to what extent such a anomalous situation can give us a comfortable understanding regarding the terrorism? Because unless I have a fixed target, I'll not be able to destroy it completely. So the way we are discussing about the poverty sometimes is coming, sometimes we have the white replacement theory, some of poverty alienated theory. So this everything I think is the some output has been created by the great powers that they are giving. They are not coming in convention. Whatever they are doing is a gap between the definition and the application of terrorism. Respected Professor, what do you think regarding this?
Thank you. Great question. Actually, I did start my today's lecture about the problems of definition. And intentionally, I have not used any definition of terrorism per se, because I started with only 3 basic definitions of extremism. and radicalization to violence. So your point is absolutely valid, actually, Mr. Where are you, Afjal? So for two reasons. One is we always had difficulty in defining terrorism. And I would only quickly say, to summarize, why. Because terrorism is contextual. As time and again I'm saying in this lecture that this topic is highly subjective and contextual. So you are super right, there is no definition. In the West, Western governments have some framework of defining terrorism. And the necessity of defining terrorism or have some working definition is needed because of the law enforcement agencies, because of the justice system, because of the intervention. So this is why there is a definition you will always find people are using in the West. However, what I think you are inquiring, whether these are applicable in some of the countries in the East. No, it cannot be applicable. Because in Western societies, the framework, the definitions, the social context, the resources are way, way different. The society that you come from, you live, must have their own definition of extremism, political violence. Remember, today I have not touched upon political violence because in many cases there are distinct, I think, studies. Your prof studied political violence quite a while. So there is a different way of defining political violence. So the frameworks varies. So in your country, you should have your own unique definition of extremism, violence, and terrorism. However, as I always say, there are some common grounds. There are common vulnerabilities that we spoke in the class, and there are tons of researches over these past 2 decades. Common vulnerabilities starts from political instability, the polarization in the society, the economic problems in the society, and then it also ties to in terms of external factors like rise of ISIS, AQ, etc., etc. So there are some common denominators what we can borrow to explain the rise of extremism and violence in our respective societies. But I totally agree with you that epistemologically it is not possible to define such a subjective matter. So we should always evolve. And that is why the title of my lecture today is Evolving Extremism and Violence in the West. Evolving. It is never something stagnant feature. It evolves. And therefore our intervention strategy must also evolve. Thank you.
Thank you, respected professor. A last follow-up question. I hope you will not mind.
No.
Yeah, it is that if we do not have any effective countermeasure to fully eradicate such kind of problems, or we can think it as a pimple on a beautiful face, then why should we are wasting? It's from my perspective, it may look funny to you, that why are we wasting if we do not have a particular solution? We should completely eradicate this problem. But why we're wasting our time, our wisdom, our knowledge in it? Is it only to reduce the problem to a sort? And if such kind of reduction will not bring any welfare project for the greater unity of the for the globe, then why such kind of project perspective?
Mr. Afjal, interesting question. So let me tell you that intervention always works. So you might say that, sir, 100%, does it work 100%? No, you can never resolve a social, because you see, extremism, violence, these are social issues. People do it, right? It's not something an organization or a robot, becoming extreme, in its activities. It's people. It is all about people. So as I also said, that extremism, violence, and this whole phenomena is historical. From the birth of humanity, we always have that issue, right? In many forms, we have gone into wars, right? Wars after wars, including 2 great wars, right? What is war? An extreme form of violence. The super extreme form of violence against each other, right? We have fought it. We have used nuclear weapons, right? So violence is something quite, I would say, by default, goes with us. But that is not the question. The question is, after the world wars, we have devised intervention strategies. See, after the Second World War, there was no Third World War. Yes, there were small wars, and even the current one in Ukraine war, there were wars because it was unstoppable. There were genocides, right, after the Holocaust. But the point is, we must also think intervention. And it is not futile to think, okay, we cannot achieve 100%, so let's not do it. That is not okay, because whatever you do, believe me, if you set a target of 80% reduction of, let's say, hate crime, if you have proper strategy, you will see 40% have been reduced. And let me give you one concrete example in New Zealand. After the Christchurch attack, which is the only one they have had, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, she really adopted some of the unique strategies. And after the New Zealand attack, we have not seen a single incidents in New Zealand. Whereas in contrast, think about United States of America. And I would definitely critique US strategy in intervention of extremism and social polarization, including the January 6th insurrection in their capital. Because of the problem in this strategy, think in the US, it keeps happening one after another. One after another, there are problems. The largest number of white supremacist extremist groups do live in the US in comparison to Canada, in comparison to New Zealand and some of the European nations, especially Norwegian and Scandinavian countries. So intervention strategy, Mr. Afzal, is important. You just cannot give up that, okay, fine, I cannot resolve 100%, so I'll not do it. No, you have to really rely on this strategy, refine your strategy. Your strategy might not be 100% foolproof at the beginning, but through practice and trial, you might achieve something. So that is how I will really would like to respond to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashikur. Thank you, sir. I think there is another question from the students. So.
Okay. Fantastic. So at the end, folks, thank you for your interest. And it is a very interesting topic, very close to my heart. I've given you lots of websites, including my current project, erim.ca.org. Please do subscribe to YouTube channel, and I will upload the lecture in our YouTube channel as well. And your subscription really matters because you can receive a lot of information from Canada in those channels. And I'm happy to help you if you have any questions, concerns later on. You have my website, email address, and I'll send the lecture note to Professor Tasmia after, I think, by tomorrow. Thank you once again, Tasmia. Back to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for the very much thought-provoking lecture. Thank you. I hope the class enjoyed it all. Sir,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kausar. We really appreciate there is a second session. First session was probably on 1st April, and you have third session on 15th April. We really appreciate your sincere devotion for this, for your, home country, basically.
Absolutely, sir.
Original country.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I was looking for such professor like you to have few sessions, but it was difficult to manage.
No, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So no worries. I do have always the best of my birthplace. I'm always tied to, and I look forward to opportunity. So that is why I said that. So thank you so much for being here.
It was mostly, the high stake price per 1 hour. So I told it, it's a public university, very difficult to manage. The teachers are always very, very costly. Except in Bangladesh, everywhere it's very costly.
No worries,
but he had been very generous to have help you students, your country students in a different way.
Anytime.
Thank you very much, sir, for your participation. And I'd like to request for one thing, that the students of this class is basically you students of IR, peace and conflict, all these things. Whenever there is scope of research, either in your country or in Bangladesh, make something joint with our students or with our teachers so that we can develop further.
Absolutely.
That would be my request to you.
No, absolutely, sir. Absolutely. And this is what I wanted to tell you. But I do have communication with Colonel Zohir, we do exchange emails back and forth. But folks, if you are interested in some of the studies that I do, if you want to publish, do let me know, and I'll be more than happy to assist you in publishing your ideas. And extremism and political violence and terrorism, these are very popular topic in the West. You can also come here to study and take part in many of the you can get job in the security sectors. Many of the agencies do hire people. And I do teach a course last 4 or 5 years now. I do have many students gotten into public service from my class. So there is an ample opportunity in the West, especially in Canada, to study. And in terms of collaborative research, please send me ideas through your prof and your institution. I'll be more than glad to accommodate and push it further in terms of funding, in terms of joint publication, and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So
Take
with
care.
this, once again, on behalf of Honorable Vice Chancellor, the Dean Chair, and also of course from Tasmia, and from all the students, the esteemed students, I would like to once again thank you, Professor Kausar sir, for your good effort.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very
Thank
much.
so You take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So we can close this session, Tasmia, or you want to
Yes.
say something?
No. I'm just really glad because I'm taking the course of terrorism and counterterrorism first time. So this session has been really helpful for my students, I hope.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.